In a city of cold glass and colder fortunes, a single tear streaks down the face of a little boy who has everything and nothing. He sits alone in a cheap diner, the heir to a billion-dollar empire invisible to the world. But one person sees him, a waitress drowning in her own sea of debt and despair, with nothing to offer but a gentle hand and a paper napkin. She doesn't know the man watching from the shadows is the boy's father, a titan of industry, capable of moving markets with a single word. He is about to make one phone call, a call that will shatter her world, expose a web of deceit, and prove that the most valuable currency isn't money, but a simple act of kindness in the face of unseen heartbreak. The rain fell on New York City in relentless gray sheets, blurring the neon signs and turning the streets into slick black mirrors. Inside the Cornerstone Diner, the air was thick with the comforting scent of frying bacon stale coffee and the low hum of conversation. It was a world away from the sterile, silent halls of Julian Sterling's penthouse, a world he hadn't willingly entered in over a decade. He sat in a worn vinyl booth in the far corner, a simple baseball cap pulled low over his brow, a plain dark coat masking the bespoke tailoring of his suit. He was a ghost in this place, an apparition of immense power, and his focus was entirely on a small boy sitting at the counter. His son, Leo. Today was Leo's 8th birthday. It was a day that should have been filled with laughter, lavish gifts, and the boisterous joy of friends. Instead, Julian had allowed his brother-in-law, Marcus, to take Leo out for a birthday treat. Julian had convinced himself it was for the best. Marcus was family, the brother of his late wife, Eleanor. He had a way with Leo, a playful charm that Julian, in his grief and all-consuming work, found himself unable to muster. But a call from his driver an hour ago had shattered that illusion. Leo had demanded to be let out of the car. He'd run off, and the driver had tracked him to this diner on Lexington Avenue. Now Julian watched. He saw the slump in his son's small shoulders, the way his brand-new sneakers, worth more than the entire day's takings, for this diner dangled inches from the floor. He saw the untouched slice of chocolate cake and the milkshake sweating onto the counter. And then he saw the tear, a single crystalline drop that escaped Leo's eye and traced a path down his cheek. It was a sight that pierced Julian's carefully constructed armor with the force of a physical blow. He was a failure, a billionaire who could command boardrooms and bend global markets to his will, but he couldn't protect his own son from a pain so deep it had stolen his voice. Just as Julian was about to rise to cross the floor and wrap his son in a clumsy, unpracticed embrace, a figure moved into his line of sight. A waitress. She was young, maybe early 20s, with dark, tired eyes that held a surprising depth. Her uniform was slightly frayed at the cuffs, her apron stained with a faint trace of coffee. She moved with an economy of motion that spoke of long hours and aching feet. She slid a plate of fries onto the counter for a trucker 2 seats down before she seemed to notice the small, silent boy. She paused, her professional smile faltering into something softer, something genuine. "Hey there, Rocket Man," she said, her voice low and gentle. "That cake isn't going to eat itself." Leo didn't look up. He just shook his head, another tear making its escape. The waitress, whose name tag read Isabella, leaned against the counter, her posture conveying a quiet patience. "Tough day at the office?" she asked, a hint of humor in her tone. Leo mumbled something Julian couldn't hear. "I get it," Isabella said. "Some days are like that, My little sister Sophia, she says some days are pudding days. The kind of day where only a giant bowl of chocolate pudding can fix things. But since you've got cake, I figure that's a good substitute. She tore a paper napkin from the dispenser, and with a pen from her apron pocket, drew a quick cartoonish rocket ship blasting off toward a smiling moon. She slid it in front of him. "For your mission," she said. Leo finally looked at the napkin. He picked it up, his small fingers tracing the ink lines. He still didn't speak, but the tension in his shoulders seemed to ease by a fraction. Isabella watched him for a moment longer. Then, with a tenderness that made Julian's breath catch in his throat, she reached out her thumb, gently wiping the tear track from Leo's cheek. It was a simple maternal gesture, the kind of gesture Eleanor would have made. It was intimate and kind, offered without expectation of reward or recognition, a small act of humanity in a city that often had none. A gruff voice barked from the kitchen. "Rossi, order up. Stop flirting with the customers and get a move on." Isabella straightened up, her expression briefly flickering with frustration before settling back into a weary professionalism. She gave Leo a small conspiratorial wink. "Duty calls. You hang in there, a rocket man." She turned and walked away, disappearing through the swinging doors into the kitchen. Leo stared down at the napkin in his hand, then took a small, hesitant bite of his cake. In the corner booth, Julian Sterling sat perfectly still, a storm of emotions raging within him. Guilt, shame, and a profound, aching gratitude. He had surrounded his son with every material object imaginable: tutors, toys, technology, but had failed to provide the one thing he truly needed: simple human connection. This waitress, this complete stranger named Isabella Rossi, had done more for his son's aching heart in 2 minutes with a napkin and a kind word than Julian had managed in the 2 years since Eleanor's death. He watched for another 20 minutes as she bustled back and forth, refilling coffee cups, taking orders, smiling at customers, even when they were curt with her. He saw the weariness etched around her eyes, the way she subtly rubbed her lower back when she thought no one was looking. He saw a life of struggle, of quiet resilience. When his driver discreetly entered the diner and motioned that he had settled Leo in the car, Julian finally moved. He stood, leaving a $100 bill on the table for a cup of coffee he'd never touched. As he walked toward the exit, he pulled out his phone. He didn't call his office. He didn't call his broker. He dialed a number that connected him to a man who operated in the shadows as effectively as Julian operated in the light. The voice on the other end was clipped and professional. "Donovan." "I have a name," Julian said, his voice a low command, as he stepped out into the rain-swept street. "Isabella Rossi. She works at the Cornerstone Diner on Lexington. I want to know everything. Where she lives, where she's from, her family, her friends, her debts, her dreams. Everything. I want a complete file on my desk by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Spare no expense." There was a pause. "Understood, Mr. Sterling. Is this person a threat?" Julian looked back through the diner's window. He saw Isabella emerge from the kitchen, a fresh pot of coffee in her hand. She glanced toward the counter where Leo had been sitting, and for a fleeting moment, a look of concern crossed her face. "No Donovan," Julian replied, his voice filled with a conviction that surprised even himself. "She's the furthest thing from it." He hung up the phone, the single call made. He didn't know it yet, but the ripples of that call were about to change not just one life, but 3, in ways none of them could ever have imagined. The first move in a drama far more complex than a simple act of charity had just been made. The file that lay on Julian Sterling's vast obsidian desk the next morning was bound in simple black leather, its contents far more compelling than any corporate merger proposal. Donovan had been, as always, ruthlessly efficient. Subject: Isabella Maria Rossi. Age: 23. Born in Queens. Daughter of Eleanor and Marco Rossi. Father: Marco. A construction worker, deceased workplace accident 10 years prior. Mother Elena works as a cleaner. One sibling, Sophia Rossi, age 14. Julian's eyes scanned the pages, his mind absorbing the data points that painted a portrait of a life lived on the edge of a precipice. Isabella had been a scholarship student at the Pratt Institute, a promising painter specializing in photorealistic portraits. She had dropped out in her second year. The reason became clear on the next page, a medical summary for her sister Sophia. Diagnosis: atypical spinal muscular atrophy, a rare degenerative neuromuscular disease. The prognosis was grim, without aggressive and staggeringly expensive experimental treatment. The family's insurance had been exhausted long ago. Isabella worked 2 jobs, the diner during the day, and cleaning offices at night to cover the cost of Sophia's current care and the mountain of debt left behind by their father. Their small apartment in Astoria was 3 months behind on rent. The file contained transcripts of conversations, financial statements, and even covertly taken photographs. One showed Isabella on a subway train, late at night, her head leaning against the window sketchpad, open on her lap, as she drew the faces of the sleeping passengers around her. Her talent was undeniable. Another photo showed her laughing with her sister in a hospital room, the sterile environment momentarily forgotten. There was no dirt, no hidden vices, no skeletons in the closet. Just a young woman who had sacrificed her own dreams on the altar of family responsibility. A woman who, despite the crushing weight of her own life, had found the grace to comfort a stranger's child. Julian closed the file. The path forward was clear, but the approach had to be precise. A simple anonymous donation would be an insult to her pride, the kind he had seen in her resilient posture. It would be charity, and Isabella Rossi was not a charity case. This needed to be a transaction, an offer she couldn't refuse, but one that allowed her to keep her dignity intact. That evening, he did something he hadn't done before. He drove himself. The Maybach remained in the garage. He took a much more understated black sedan from his collection and drove back to the Cornerstone diner. It was the end of her shift. Isabella was wiping down the last of the tables, moving with a bone-deep weariness. The diner's manager, a portly man named Carl, with a perpetually sour expression, was counting the till. "Hurry it up, Rossi," Carl grumbled without looking up. "You're not getting paid to stand around." "Almost done, Carl," she said, her voice flat with fatigue. Julian stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed and Carl looked up, his expression shifting from annoyance to a kind of greasy deference as he took in Julian's expensive watch and perfectly tailored coat. "Table for one, sir?" Carl asked, practically purring. "No, thank you," Julian said, his voice calm but resonant in the small space. "I'm here to speak with Ms. Rossi." Both Isabella and Carl froze. Isabella stared at him, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She recognized him not from the booth, but from the countless magazine covers and financial news segments. He was Julian Sterling. Her mind raced. What would a man like him want with me? Is it about the boy? Did I do something wrong? "I have a business proposition for you." "Ms. Rossi," Julian continued, ignoring Carl. "If you have a moment." Isabella swallowed her throat, suddenly dry. Yes, of course." She untied her apron, her hands trembling slightly, and placed it on the counter. "Use my office," Carl offered, gesturing toward a small, cluttered room at the back. "That won't be necessary," Julian said, his gaze fixed on Isabella. "My car is outside. It will afford us more privacy." The statement hung in the air, laden with implications. For a moment, fear warred with curiosity in Isabella's eyes, but the man before her, despite his immense power, had a look of utter seriousness, not menace. She gave a slight nod. Outside, the air was cool. Julian opened the passenger door of the sedan for her, a gesture of old-world courtesy that felt jarringly out of place. The interior of the car was a cocoon of silent luxury, the scent of rich leather, a stark contrast to the diner's fried food. Isabella sat stiffly, her hands clasped in her lap. "Mr. Sterling," she began, "if this is about your son, I hope I didn't overstep. He just looked so sad." "On the contrary, Ms. Rossi," Julian said, turning to face her. "What you did for my son yesterday was the first genuine moment of kindness he has experienced in a very long time. For that, I am in your debt." "You don't owe me anything," she said quickly. "Anyone would have done the same." "But they didn't," Julian countered. "You did. I have come to understand that you are a person of rare character, and I find myself in need of a person with exactly your qualifications." Isabella blinked. "My qualifications, I'm a waitress." "You are an artist," he corrected her gently. "A talented one, from what I've seen. And you have a capacity for empathy that is, shall we say, in short supply. My son Leo has been struggling since his mother passed away. He is surrounded by staff, but he is lonely. He has an interest in art, but no one to nurture it." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I would like to offer you a position, a job. I want you to be Leo's artistic mentor and companion. You would have your own private studio space in my home. You would spend a few hours with him each day, simply talking to him, drawing with him, and being a positive presence in his life. The rest of the time would be your own, to focus on your painting." Isabella was stunned into silence. It sounded too good to be true, a fantasy plucked from a fairy tale. "And the compensation?" she finally managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. "Your salary would be $250,000 a year," Julian stated, as if discussing the weather. "And as part of the comprehensive benefits package for senior household staff, Sterling Enterprises will assume full financial responsibility for all medical care for you and your immediate family." The world tilted on its axis. All medical care. Sophia, the experimental treatments, the chance at a real future for her sister. It was a lifeline, a miracle wrapped in a business proposal. Tears pricked her eyes, but she fought them back. Pride was a stubborn thing. "Why?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Why me? You could hire the best art teachers in the world." "I don't need the best art teacher, Ms. Rossi. I need a good person," Julian said, his gaze unwavering. "Leo doesn't need another employee in his life. He needs a friend. I saw the way he looked at you. I saw the way you looked at him. This isn't charity. It's a solution to a problem I have. You have something my money cannot buy, and I am prepared to pay for it." Her mind was a whirlwind of hope and suspicion. To be pulled from her life of grinding poverty into a world of unimaginable wealth. It felt dangerous. But then she thought of Sophia, of her pale face in the hospital bed, of the mounting pile of bills on their kitchen table. Her choice was already made. "There would be conditions," Julian added. his tone becoming more formal. "A thorough background check, which I have already taken the liberty of completing, and a non-disclosure agreement of the strictest terms. The Sterling family's privacy is paramount." "I understand," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. She looked at her reflection in the polished dashboard. She saw the tired waitress, the worried sister, the failed artist. This offer wasn't just about money. It was a chance to reclaim a part of herself she thought was lost forever. It was a chance to save her sister. "I accept your offer, Mr. Sterling," Isabella said. A flicker of relief so subtle it was almost imperceptible crossed Julian's face. "Excellent. My chief of staff will contact you tomorrow with the details and the contract. Your employment will begin on Monday." He drove her back to her apartment building in Astoria, the silence in the car no longer tense, but filled with the weight of the agreement that had just been forged. As she stepped out of the car and back into her world of cracked pavement and sirens in the distance, she felt as though she were stepping from one reality into another. She looked up at the towering skyscrapers of Manhattan across the river, where the Sterling penthouse undoubtedly sat like a castle in the sky. She was about to enter the lion's den, not as a victim, but as a paid employee. But as she clutched the keys to her apartment, a shiver of apprehension ran down her spine. A golden cage, she thought, is still a queue. The elevator that ascended to the Sterling penthouse didn't have buttons for floors. It opened with a private keycard and moved in unnerving silence, its speed a testament to the seamless, frictionless world Julian Sterling had built for himself. When the doors opened directly into the foyer, Isabella felt her breath catch. It wasn't a home, it was a monument. Two-story walls of glass revealed a panoramic, godlike view of Central Park. The floors were Italian marble. The furniture was minimalist and architectural, and the air itself seemed filtered and sterile. A single massive abstract painting hung on one wall, its chaotic splash of color a stark contrast to the monochromatic perfection surrounding it. It was beautiful, intimidating, and profoundly lonely. A severe-looking woman with a tight grey bun and a tablet in her hand. The chief of staff, Mrs. Albright, had given Isabella a brisk tour and a copy of her contract. Her living quarters were a suite of rooms larger than her entire Astoria apartment, complete with a small, beautifully equipped art studio with a north-facing window. It was everything she could have ever dreamed of, and it felt utterly alien. Her first meeting with Leo was in the grand living area. The boy was sitting on a vast white sofa, looking small and lost. When he saw her, his eyes widened, a spark of recognition and confusion lighting his face. "Isabella?" he asked, his voice hesitant. "Hi, Leo," she said, offering a warm smile that felt a little shaky. "Your dad thought you and I could hang out. Maybe do some drawing." Julian stood by the window, observing his presence, a silent pressure in the room. "You're the lady from the diner," Leo said, a small smile touching his lips. He was still clutching the napkin with the rocket ship on it. "That's me," she confirmed. "I hear you're a bit of an artist yourself." Over the next few days, a delicate routine began to form. Isabella learned that beneath Leo's quiet exterior was a bright, inquisitive mind and a wild imagination. They didn't just draw. They built fantastical creatures out of clay, created comic books about a space-traveling dog, and lay on the floor of her studio, imagining stories in the clouds visible through the huge window. For the first time in years, genuine laughter echoed in the silent penthouse. Julian, who often worked from his home office, would occasionally emerge drawn by the sound. He would stand at a distance, a strange, unreadable expression on his face as he watched Isabella and Leo build a fortress out of sofa cushions. He saw his son's posture straighten, the light return to his eyes. The investment was paying off. But Isabella soon learned that the gilded cage came with a warden. Marcus Thorne, Eleanor's brother, was a frequent visitor. He was handsome, in a slick, predatory way, with a salesman's smile that never quite reached his eyes. He treated the penthouse like his own second home, and from their first meeting, he regarded Isabella with unconcealed disdain. "So you're the new court jester," he said one afternoon, strolling into the studio where Isabella and Leo were painting. He was dressed in a tailored suit that seemed a shade too flashy, a large gold watch glinting on his wrist. "I'm Isabella," she said, her tone neutral, not rising to the bait. "Ah, yes. The waitress," Marcus said, picking up one of her charcoal sketches. It was a portrait of Leo capturing a moment of intense concentration. A hidden talent, or perhaps a talent for hiding. It's amazing what a pretty face and a sob story can get you these days. "Uncle Marcus be nice," Leo said, his brow furrowed. "Izzy is my friend." "Of course she is, kiddo," Marcus said, ruffling Leo's hair with a cloying familiarity. "Everyone wants to be your friend." He shot a pointed look at Isabella, the meaning clear. "You're here for the money, just like everyone else." The incidents grew more frequent, more pointed. He would accidentally knock over a jar of paint water near her finished canvases. He would make loud, pointed remarks to Mrs. Albright about the appropriateness of having hired help grow so close to the boy. He was a snake in the grass, and Isabella felt his venomous presence coiling around her. She tried to ignore him, focusing on Leo and her art. In the evenings after Leo was asleep, she would call her mother and Sophia. The news was miraculously good. Sophia had been admitted to a top-tier private clinic, the one pioneering the experimental gene therapy. The doctors were optimistic. Hearing her sister's hopeful voice was the fuel that kept Isabella going. It was the reason she endured Marcus's snide remarks and the suffocating perfection of the penthouse. One evening, Julian came to her studio. He rarely entered the space, respecting it as her sanctuary. She was working on a large oil painting, a piece born from her new reality. It depicted a small, fragile bird with brilliant plumage enclosed within a massive, intricate key made of pure gold. "That's powerful," Julian said, his voice startling her. He stood near the doorway. His tie loosened a glass of whiskey in his hand. "It's just a study," she said, wiping her hands on a rag. "Is that how you see this place?" he asked, his gaze direct. "A cage." Isabella chose her words carefully. "It's the most beautiful cage I've ever seen. But it's hard to forget the bars are there." He was silent for a long moment, studying the painting. "My wife, Eleanor, she felt the same way. She called it the glass tower. She said you could see the whole world from up here, but you couldn't touch any of it." It was the first time he had mentioned his wife by name to her. The admission was a crack in his armor, a moment of startling vulnerability. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Marcus tells me you're settling in well," he said, changing the subject, his walls going back up. "He's very attentive," Isabella replied, the diplomatic word choice, not lost on Julian. "Marcus has a vested interest in Leo's well-being," Julian said, though his tone lacked conviction. "He manages a portion of the trust Eleanor left for Leo. He takes that responsibility very seriously." Or he takes the money very seriously, Isabella thought, but she kept silent. She was learning the rules of this world. What you thought and what you said were two very different things. The tension came to a head a week later. Julian was hosting a small formal dinner for some investors. Isabella was not expected to attend, but as she was passing through the living area to get to her room, she saw Marcus cornering Leo near the vast windows. "And you have to be careful, Leo," Marcus was saying in a low, conspiratorial tone. "People who come from nothing will do anything for money. They pretend to be your friend, but they just want what we have. Your father is too busy to see it, so you have to be my little spy, okay? Let me know if she asks for anything or tries to get you to feel sorry for her." Rage, cold and pure, washed over Isabella. This wasn't just snide commentary anymore. He was actively poisoning Leo against her. He was using a child's grief and confusion as a weapon. Before she could think, she stepped forward. "That's enough, Marcus." Marcus turned, his charming smile snapping into place, but his eyes were like ice chips. "Isabella, I was just having a chat with my nephew." "No," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "You were poisoning his mind. Whatever issues you have, you direct them at me. You leave him out of it. He is a child." "Know your place, waitress," Marcus hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper as Leo shrank back. "You are an employee, a temporary one, and you are one misstep away from being back on the street where you belong." Just then Julian entered the room with one of his guests, a Japanese investor named Mr. Tanaka. They both stopped, sensing the palpable tension. "Is there a problem here?" Julian asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Marcus immediately straightened his tie, his smile returning. "Not at all, Julian. Just a minor misunderstanding." Isabella was feeling a little overwhelmed by the party. He placed a proprietary hand on Leo's shoulder. "Everything is perfectly fine." Isabella looked at Julian, her eyes pleading with him to see the truth. But she saw only a flicker of annoyance in his face, annoyance at her for creating a scene. He gave her a curt, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a clear command to stand down. Humiliation washed over her. In this world, the snake with the family name would always win against the hired help. She lowered her gaze, biting her lip to keep from saying more. "You're right," she said, the words tasting like ash. "I'm sorry to have interrupted." She turned and walked away, the feeling of the golden bars of her cage pressing in on her more than ever before. She didn't see the thoughtful, troubled look that Mr. Tanaka gave Julian, nor did she see the cold, calculating glint in Julian's eyes as he watched Marcus lead Leo away. He had seen more than anyone realized, and the quiet war for his son's soul had just acquired a new, unwilling soldier. The aftermath of the confrontation was a week of suffocating civility. Marcus was conspicuously absent from the penthouse, and Julian treated Isabella with a cool, professional distance that was worse than his anger. He was observing her, weighing her, and she felt as if she were under a microscope. Her bond with Leo was her only solace. The boy seemed to cling to her more than ever, as if sensing the invisible battle being waged around him. Isabella threw herself into her work, both with Leo and in her studio. She was channeling her frustration and fear onto the canvas. Her art was becoming bolder, darker. The painting of the bird in the golden cage was joined by others, a series of portraits of smiling faces that were subtly cracking like porcelain, a rendering of the penthouse as a ship of glass adrift in a stormy sky. Marcus, however, had not been idle. He had been digging, searching for a weapon, a crack in Isabella's past that he could exploit. And he found one. It was small, sealed, and from a time in her life she had long since buried. When she was 16, a year after her father's death, and before his life insurance had paid out, her mother had been unable to afford a specific medication for Sophia. In a moment of sheer desperation, Isabella had tried to shoplift the medicine valued at $60 from a pharmacy. She had been caught. Due to her age and the circumstances the record was sealed, the charges eventually dismissed after community service. It was a scar of shame, a reminder of her family's lowest point. Marcus, through a shady private investigator, got his hands on it. It was the perfect weapon, small enough to be plausible, damaging enough to destroy the trust Julian had placed in her. But he needed to frame it correctly. An old act of desperation wasn't enough. He needed a fresh crime. The opportunity came on a Thursday. Julian was in London for a 48-hour trip to close a major acquisition. Mrs. Albright, the formidable chief of staff, had a rare day off. The penthouse was quieter than usual, staffed only by a skeleton crew. It was the perfect time to strike. That morning, Marcus arrived all smiles and apologies. He brought a peace offering, an expensive limited edition set of German pastels for Leo. "I was out of line the other day, Isabella," he said, his tone oozing sincerity. "I've been under a lot of stress. I hope you can forgive me." Isabella, though wary, accepted the apology for Leo's sake. The three of them spent an hour in the studio, a fragile truce hanging in the air. While Isabella's back was turned, helping Leo mix a specific shade of blue, Marcus executed his plan. He slipped a small, incredibly valuable object from his pocket, one of Julian's signature platinum cufflinks, a gift from Eleanor that he kept in a display box on his dresser, and dropped it into the bottom of Isabella's art satchel, which lay open on the floor. It was a cruel and brilliant choice. The cufflink was deeply personal, its theft an act of profound violation. The next day, all hell broke loose. Julian returned from London early in the morning. An hour later, Isabella was summoned to his office. The vast room, usually a place of calm power, felt like an interrogation chamber. Julian was standing behind his desk, his face like a granite mask. Marcus stood near the window, a look of grave concern etched on his features. "Isabella," Julian began, his voice devoid of all warmth. "It seems one of my personal effects has gone missing from my bedroom. A platinum cufflink. It is of immense sentimental value." Isabella's blood ran cold. I don't know anything about that, Mr. Sterling." "Are you sure?" Marcus interjected, his voice smooth as silk. "It's just that the only people with unrestricted access to the penthouse over the last 2 days have been myself, the cleaning staff, who are bonded and have worked here for years, and you." "What are you implying?" Isabella asked, her voice trembling. "Julian," Marcus said, turning to his brother-in-law, "I'm sorry I have to say this. I've had my concerns from the beginning. We know she comes from a difficult background. Desperate people do desperate things." He looked at Isabella with feigned pity. "We even have this." He slid a file across the desk. Julian opened it. Isabella could see the letterhead of a municipal court, her juvenile record. "A sealed record of theft," Julian said, his voice flat. He looked at Isabella, and in his eyes she saw not just suspicion, but the cold, hard calculation of a businessman cutting his losses. "This is very disappointing." "It's not what you think," she pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "My sister was sick. We had no money. I was a child." "And what are you now?" Marcus sneered. "A thief is a thief. I'm sure if we were to look through your things, we'd find the cufflink. You were probably waiting for an opportunity to pawn it." "Then look!" Isabella cried, her voice cracking with desperation and rage. "Look through my things. Search my room, my studio. I have nothing to hide." It was exactly what Marcus had been waiting for. "A sensible idea," he said calmly. Julian gave a curt nod to Marcus, who immediately strode out of the room heading for her studio. Isabella stood frozen in place, trapped in a nightmare. She looked at Julian, hoping to see a glimmer of doubt of trust in the woman who had brought his son back to life. She saw nothing. He had already convicted her. A few minutes later, Marcus returned. He held a small velvet bag in his hand. With a theatrical flourish, he opened it and tipped the platinum cufflink onto the polished surface of the desk. It glittered under the light, a damning piece of evidence. "It was at the bottom of her art bag," Marcus announced, his voice filled with sorrowful vindication. Tucked away, the silence in the room was absolute. Isabella felt the floor drop out from beneath her. It was a perfect diabolical frame-up. She had no defense, no explanation. Her past, her poverty, her very presence here all conspired to paint a picture of guilt. "I didn't do it." She whispered the words, sounding feeble even to her own ears. "Mr. Sterling, Julian, you have to believe me. He put it there. He's been trying to get rid of me from the start." Julian looked from the cufflink to her tear-streaked face. His expression was unreadable, his mind a fortress. He had built his empire on logic, on data, on mitigating risk. And right now, Isabella Rossi was the biggest risk in his life. "Pack your things," he said, his voice cold and final. "My security will escort you from the building. The contract is terminated effective immediately. Consider the severance clause void due to criminal activity." Each word was a hammer blow. The job, the studio, her art, Sophia, the medical care, the medicals. Oh God, Sophia. The lifeline would be cut. The hope extinguished, all because of a lie. Just as the despair threatened to swallow her whole, a small voice piped up from the doorway. "You're lying, Uncle Marcus!" Everyone turned. Leo stood in the doorway, his face pale, his knuckles white where he gripped the frame. He had clearly been drawn by the raised voices. "Leo, go back to your room," Julian commanded, his voice sharp. But Leo didn't move. He stepped into the office, his eyes blazing with a fierce loyalty that mirrored the one Isabella had shown him. "I heard you," he said. His gaze locked on his uncle. "You're a liar." "Leo, my boy." "You're confused," Marcus said, trying to regain control, his smile wavering. "No, I'm not," Leo insisted, his voice growing stronger. "The other day you told me Izzy only wanted our money. And yesterday in the studio when she was helping me, I saw you. You dropped something shiny in her bag. I didn't know what it was. But you did it. You're a liar and a bully." The accusation, pure and simple from the mouth of a child, hung in the air with more weight than any adult denial. Marcus's face went white. "He's a child, Julian. He's making things up. He's attached to her. She's manipulated him." But Julian was no longer looking at Marcus or Isabella. He was looking at his son. He saw no confusion, no manipulation. He saw the clear, unwavering conviction of truth. He saw the same honesty he'd seen in the boy's grief at the diner. It was a truth his logical, data-driven mind could not deny. He had been so focused on the evidence presented to him that he had missed the most important evidence of all, the character of the people involved. He had trusted the snake and doubted the savior. The granite mask on Julian's face finally cracked, replaced by a look of dawning, horrifying realization. He had almost made the biggest mistake of his life. The atmosphere in the office shifted from a summary execution to a tense, silent standoff. Leo's words had changed the entire equation. They were the single, unassailable data point that contradicted everything else. Marcus was sputtering, trying to dismiss it as childish fantasy, but his panic was palpable. His slick composure was fracturing at the edges. Julian held up a hand, silencing him. His gaze, now sharp as a shard of ice, moved from Marcus to the cufflink on the desk, then to Isabella's devastated face, and finally rested on his son. "Leo," Julian said, his voice steady and low. "Tell me again exactly what you saw." "When Izzy was showing me how to make the sky look real," Leo said, stepping further into the room. "Uncle Marcus was behind her. He took something shiny from his pocket and dropped it in her big black bag. I thought it was a candy wrapper or something, but he looked around to see if anyone was watching." Julian's eyes narrowed on his brother-in-law. "Is that so, Marcus, a piece of candy?" "This is absurd," Marcus blustered, sweat beading on his forehead. "You're going to take the word of a confused child over me. Your family, the man who has looked after your son, the man who manages a portion of his trust." "You mean?" Julian said, his voice dangerously soft. The pieces were clicking into place in his mind with terrifying speed. The veiled warnings, the subtle sabotage, the over-the-top charm. It was all part of a larger campaign. He pressed an intercom button on his desk. "Donovan," he said, his voice a low command. "Get in here, now, and bring the preliminary audit from the Thorne-managed trust. And I want security on standby outside this office. No one leaves." Marcus's face drained of its remaining color. "Julian, this is unnecessary. It's a misunderstanding." "I'm beginning to think there is no misunderstanding at all," Julian replied coldly. While they waited, an unbearable silence descended. Isabella stood by her heart, pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was no longer just fighting for her job. She was a spectator at the implosion of a powerful man. Leo went to her side and took her hand, a small, defiant gesture of solidarity. Donovan entered, silent and efficient, as always. He was a former military intelligence officer, with a face that betrayed no emotion. He placed a thick file on the desk in front of Julian and stood back, his arms crossed. Julian flipped open the file. His eyes scanned the pages, his expression growing darker with every line he read. The preliminary audit was clearly something he had initiated earlier, perhaps after the confrontation witnessed by Mr. Tanaka. He had been suspicious long before the cufflink incident. This had just been the final piece of the puzzle. "It's all here, isn't it, Marcus?" Julian said, not looking up from the pages. "High-risk investments that all went sour. Consulting fees paid to shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands. A systematic siphoning of funds from our son's trust for the last 18 months. You haven't been managing his money. You've been stealing it to cover your own catastrophic gambling debts." Marcus stared at him, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The charismatic mask had completely disintegrated, revealing the desperate, cornered man beneath. "You needed her gone." Julian continued, the chilling logic falling into place. She was making Leo happy. She was making him stable. A stable, happy child would eventually grow into a man who might ask questions about his trust fund. And more than that, she was gaining my trust. Your influence was waning. You were afraid that I or she would uncover what you've been doing. He finally looked up, and the cold fury in his eyes made Marcus flinch. "So you framed her. You used my son's affection for her as a weapon, and you used my wife's memory, this cufflink, as your tool. You would have destroyed this woman's life, jeopardized her sister's medical care, and traumatized my son further, all to cover your own pathetic crimes." "Julian, please." Marcus whimpered, his arrogance collapsing into a pathetic plea. "I can pay it back. It was a temporary situation. Donovan, Julian said, his voice ringing with finality. Escort Mr. Thorne to the security office downstairs. Have them hold him. The NYPD will be here shortly. I will be pressing charges for theft, fraud, and embezzlement. Get him out of my sight. 2 uniformed security guards entered the room. They each took one of Marcus's arms. He didn't struggle. He looked utterly defeated, a hollowed-out shell of the man he had pretended to be. As they led him away, his eyes met Isabella's for a moment. She saw no remorse, only the bitter hatred of being caught. The door clicked shut, leaving Julian, Isabella, and Leo alone in the suddenly vast and quiet office. The adrenaline drained away from Isabella, leaving her weak and trembling. She sank into one of the chairs, pulling Leo into a hug, burying her face in his hair. Julian rounded the desk. He stopped in front of her, his face a complex mask of shame, regret, and relief. Isabella, he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. There are no words to express how sorry I am. She looked up at him, tears streaming freely down her face. Now tears of relief, not despair. I doubted you, he continued, his voice cracking slightly. After everything you've done for my son, for me, my first instinct was to protect my assets, to believe the lie, because it was the simplest explanation. I let my cynicism, my world, poison my judgment. I almost destroyed you. Can you forgive me? It was a raw, honest confession. The billionaire titan was gone, replaced by a man humbled by his own fallibility. He wasn't apologizing for a business error. He was apologizing for a failure of faith, a failure of heart. You believed your son, she said softly, wiping her tears. That's what matters. He's a better judge of character than I am. Julian admitted, a sad smile touching his lips as he looked at Leo. He then knelt down in front of his son. Leo, you were brave today. Braver than anyone I know. You told the truth even when it was scary. I am so proud of you. Your mother would have been proud of you. Leo, who had been stoic through the whole ordeal, finally let his own tears fall, and he launched himself into his father's arms. Julian held him tightly, a real embrace this time, full of remorse and fierce, rediscovered love. After a long moment, Julian looked back at Isabella, his eyes still holding the weight of his apology. Your contract is of course reinstated, with a significant raise and a formal apology from the company. But more than that, I have something else to tell you about your sister. Isabella's heart leaped into her throat. Sophia is something wrong. No, he said quickly. Something is very, very right. When Donovan did his initial investigation into your background, he flagged her medical condition. The Sterling Foundation has been the primary funder for a new clinical trial for atypical SMA. The lead researcher, Dr. Aris Thorne, no relation, thank God, is pioneering a new form of gene therapy. It's the clinic where Sophia was admitted. He paused, making sure she understood. I made a call after I read the file. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to give you false hope. But I fast-tracked her case. She wasn't just admitted, Isabella. She was chosen as one of the first candidates to receive the new therapy. Her treatment began 3 days ago. The initial response, according to Dr. Thorne, is more positive than they could have ever hoped for. Isabella stared at him, unable to process the magnitude of what he was saying. The one call, the first call he had made to Donovan, had set all of this in motion. It wasn't just about giving her a job. He had been working to save her sister from the very beginning. Her entire world, her entire future, had been altered by a single moment of kindness in a diner and a chain of events she had been completely unaware of. The golden cage hadn't been a cage at all. It had been a rescue. She let out a sob, a sound of such overwhelming, cathartic relief that it seemed to fill the entire room. Julian Sterling had not just changed her life with a call. He had saved it. 6 months later, the Sterling penthouse was no longer a sterile monument to wealth, but a home softened by the joyful chaos of life. A colourful finger painting was taped to the refrigerator, and a lopsided clay dragon, Leo's creation, sat proudly on the minimalist mantelpiece. The most profound change was the frequent bright presence of Sophia Rossi. The gene therapy, a quiet miracle set in motion by Julian, had been a resounding success. With her health restored, she spent her days at the penthouse, a vibrant girl, whose laughter filled the once silent halls as she and Leo formed an inseparable bond. The rigid lines between employer and staff had long since dissolved. Isabella was the heart of their new reality, a confidant to Julian and a cherished mentor to Leo. Julian himself was transformed. He left the office at a reasonable hour, relearning how to be a father instead of just a provider. The four of them, Julian, Leo, Isabella, and Sophia, had become a unique and tightly knit chosen family. Tonight marked a pivotal moment in Isabella's journey, the opening of her first solo art exhibition in a prestigious Soho gallery. While Julian's backing had opened the door, it was her powerful portfolio that had earned her the coveted spot. The gallery was buzzing, filled with critics and collectors. Isabella, radiant in a simple dark blue dress, stood amongst her work a world away from the tired waitress in a frayed uniform. Her mother Elena watched with tears of pride, standing beside a healthy, vibrant Sophia. The collection, titled The Glass Tower, was a raw and beautiful narrative of her journey. But the centerpiece, hanging alone on the main wall, stopped everyone in their tracks. It was a breathtakingly realistic oil painting, titled simply The Cornerstone. It depicted a small, heartbroken boy at a diner counter, a waitress with tired eyes leaning over him, her hand gently wiping away a tear. In the reflection of a chrome napkin dispenser, the blurry figure of a man in a baseball cap watched from the shadows. It was the moment that had started everything, captured with profound empathy. Julian stood before it, transfixed. He saw not just a scene, but his own failure and redemption laid bare on the canvas. Isabella came to stand beside him. "Thank you, Isabella," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that went far beyond gratitude. "For everything. You didn't just save Leo. You saved me." "We saved each other," she replied softly, her smile genuine. Just then, a well-known collector approached them. "Ms. Rossi, an extraordinary piece," he said, gesturing to The Cornerstone. "Name your price. I will double it." Before Isabella could speak, Julian stepped forward slightly. "I'm sorry," he said, his tone polite but firm. "But that one is not for sale." The collector, surprised, nodded and moved on. Isabella looked at Julian, a question in her eyes. "It's already been acquired," Julian explained quietly, his gaze still fixed on the painting of the boy and the waitress. "It belongs in a home. Our home." In that moment, it was clear this was not a fairy tale ending. It was something far more real and enduring, a new beginning, built not on a foundation of wealth or power, but on the enduring strength of forgiveness and the simple, life-altering power of a single act of kindness. This story reminds us that in a world that often values status and wealth above all else, the most powerful investments we can make are in each other. A simple act of kindness, a moment of empathy, can set off a chain reaction that changes lives in ways we can never predict. Isabella's compassion wasn't just a gesture. It was a lifeline that pulled a father and son back from the brink and in turn saved her own family. If this story of unexpected connection and redemption moved you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who might need a reminder of the good in the world. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We believe everyone has a story worth telling, and by subscribing you'll never miss out on our next journey into the heart of what it means to be human. What act of kindness has changed your life? Let us know in the comments below.